I almost lost my son. That was the price I paid for living a lie. It was a secret life I built to protect myself, one that my family twisted into a weapon to prove I was worthless. I'm Taylor, and I'm 39. I learned the hard way that the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes you have to fight for it. If you've ever felt like you had to hide a part of yourself to survive, please subscribe and join me. This is the story of how I finally stopped hiding. Before that room, before the lies became legal testimony, there was a world that existed only between my son and me. It lived in an attic, a sanctuary of slanted ceilings and worn wooden floors at the top of a rambling Victorian in the older part of Harbor City. To an outsider, it was chaos. Stacks of books leaned like tired old men. Against the walls, loose manuscript pages formed snowdrifts on my desk, and the air was thick with the scent of paper ink and brewing tea. To me, it was home. This afternoon was like any other. The late sun slanted through the single large dormer window, illuminating the dancing dust motes in golden shafts of light. My 9-year-old son, Leo, was sprawled across my stomach, his dark hair brushing against my chin as he read. His weight was a warm, familiar comfort. My own fingers were smudged with the deep blue ink of my favorite fountain pen, a testament to a productive morning spent wrestling with words. Mom Leo's voice was soft, pulling me from my daze. He pointed a small finger at a line in his book. It says, "The king sealed the enchanted forest with a word of power." How can a word be powerful enough to make a door? I smiled, running my hand through his hair. Because words are the most powerful magic there is. Sweet boy. They can build worlds or they can tear them down. A single word can make someone feel loved, or it can break their heart. That's a door, isn't it? He considered this with a profound seriousness only a child can muster. I guess so, he conceded, then burrowed back into his book, satisfied. In that moment, surrounded by my creative mess with my brilliant, thoughtful son, in my arms, I felt a peace so complete it was almost painful. It was a fragile snow globe, a perfect self-contained world I had built for us. And then the doorbell rang. A sharp, cold sound that sliced through the quiet warmth of the attic. Leo looked up, his brow furrowed. We didn't get many visitors. I gently slid out from under him and went downstairs. Through the distorted glass of the front door, I could see the uniformed silhouette of a courier. My stomach tightened. Couriers meant official business. Couriers meant Adrian. I signed for the large, stiff envelope, my hand trembling slightly. It was from a downtown law firm, its name embossed in elegant, merciless script. It felt as thick and heavy as a tombstone. Back in the attic, Leo watched me with wide, worried eyes. My world wasn't being threatened by a stranger. It was being dismantled from the inside by the very people who were supposed to help me hold it together. My father's name on that paper shouldn't have been a shock. The cracks had been there for years. I'd just become an expert at painting over them. But a year ago, at one of Adrian's perfectly curated dinner parties, the paint had chipped, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Adrian's house was the opposite of my attic. It was a minimalist masterpiece of glass and steel, overlooking the harbor, a place so sterile you felt like you needed permission to breathe. I always felt like an imposter there, a splash of untidy color in his monochrome world. That night, squeezed into a designer dress I couldn't afford, I was playing the part of the supportive wife while he wooed potential investors for his new tech venture. At one point, He draped an arm around me, pulling me into a conversation. "This is my lovely wife, Taylor," he announced to a silver-haired tycoon. He smiled, but it was a smile that never reached his cold blue eyes. "She's the artist in the family. She has this whole secret world inside that head of hers. Sometimes I have to check if she remembers to join us in the real one." The men chuckled politely. It was a familiar jab, coated in the thinnest veneer of humor. A little joke to remind everyone that my work wasn't serious, that I was the whimsical, slightly ungrounded counterpart to his sharp, business-minded brilliance. I felt a familiar flush of humiliation, but it was what came next that truly cut me. My father, Henry, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward with a hearty laugh, clapping Adrian on the shoulder. "She gets the practical side from me. Don't you worry," he said ostensibly to defend me, but his words were another kind of weapon. "I keep telling her she should get a real estate license. Now that's a respectable career, something you can see and touch." He then looked at Adrian, his eyes filled with a genuine admiration he rarely showed me. "You've been very patient with her son." Son. The word hung in the air, a formal transfer of allegiance. In my father's eyes, Adrian, with his wealth, his ambition, his cold, hard grasp on the real world, was the child he was proud of. I was just a project, a whimsical problem he and my husband had to patiently manage. That was the moment I understood I wasn't just fighting Adrian's ambition. I was fighting my father's disappointment. The morning of the arbitration hearing, the air in the attic was thick with a silence that felt heavier than sound. I moved on autopilot, making Leo pancakes, trying to smile, as he chattered about a dream he'd had about a dragon who breathed ice instead of fire. But my hands shook as I poured the syrup. "Mom?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. "Why is Grandpa so mad at you?" "I heard Dad on the phone saying Grandpa's mad because you won't grow up." The innocent question, a parroted phrase from a conversation he was never meant to hear, felt like a physical blow. I knelt in front of him, forcing a brightness into my voice I didn't feel. "Grown-ups have complicated feelings. Leo, it's nothing for you to worry about. I love you. Grandpa loves you. And that's all that matters." He seemed to accept it, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. As I was packing his school bag, my phone buzzed. The screen read, "Eliza." For one wild, stupid moment, hope surged through me. Maybe she was calling to apologize. Maybe she was calling to say she wouldn't go through with it, that she wouldn't testify against her own sister. It was the glimmer of a lifeline, the thought that maybe I wasn't completely alone. I answered, my voice tight. "Eliza Taylor." Her voice was cool, distant. There was no warmth, no sisterly affection. "I'm calling to tell you not to make this harder than it needs to be. Dad is serious about this. You need to stop. Stop! He's trying to take my son, Eliza. How can you be a part of this?" There was a sigh, the impatient sound of someone dealing with a hysterical child. "Listen to me." Adrian offered Dad an advisory position on the board of his new project. It's a big deal for him for his retirement. She paused, then delivered the final fatal blow. "Do you understand? You can't win this. It's already done. Just accept Adrian's offer. Do it for Leo. For Leo." The words coming from her were a profane twisting of love into a weapon of surrender. She wasn't just abandoning me. She was using my son as leverage, cloaking a selfish, financially motivated betrayal in a shroud of motherly concern. I hung up without another word. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. The last thread of hope had been severed. It was true. I was utterly, completely alone. The arbitration hearing wasn't held in a grand courtroom, but in a sterile, soulless conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces around it. Adrian sat on one side, flanked by a shark of a lawyer. He looked immaculate in a tailored navy suit, the very picture of stability and success. Beside him sat my father, his back ramrod straight, his expression an unreadable mask of grim determination. And then there was me, on the other side. Alone. When it was his turn, my father took the witness stand, a single leather chair at the head of the table. He didn't look at me. Adrian's lawyer began his questioning, his voice dripping with faux compassion. Henry's testimony was a master class in character assassination, delivered with the calm, objective tone of a concerned patriarch. "My daughter lives in a world of her own making," he said, his voice steady. "She can disappear into that room of hers for days at a time. I call that irresponsibility. A child needs a parent who is present," he continued. "I visited her apartment. It's frankly alarming. Papers and books everywhere. It's chaos. A boy needs structure, stability, not the romanticized chaos of a struggling artist." The lawyer nodded grimly. "And what about her employment, Mr. Vance?" "I've never seen a real employment contract," my father stated as if it were a fact from a textbook. "There are small jobs here and there, little projects, a hobby. A mother needs a career, sir, not a hobby." It was all I could do to sit there, hands clasped in my lap, and absorb the blows. After my father was done, the lawyer approached the arbitrator, a man with tired eyes and a neutral expression. "We don't mean to disparage Ms. Vance," he said smoothly. "We are simply concerned, deeply concerned." He slid a thin folder across the table. "Sir, this is the evidence of the work Ms. Vance has performed over the last 6 months." He pulled out a single sheet of paper. "It's a freelance contract for ghostwriting articles for a local travel blog. Total income $500. He let the number hang in the air, a paltry, pathetic sum. "This," he said, his voice ringing with finality, "is the entirety of her so-called career. This is what she believes constitutes providing for her child." The arbitrator read the document. His gaze lifted, and for the first time his neutral expression shifted. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw it all: disappointment, concern, and a flicker of pity. Adrian's lawyer smiled, a small triumphant curl of his lips. Adrian looked at me, not with anger, but with the condescending sadness of a man who had been proven right all along. My father wouldn't look at me at all. He just stared at the polished table. In that moment, I felt nothing. A vast, hollow emptiness where a heart should have been. Every door had been locked, every escape route sealed. There was no way out. The story was over, and I had already lost. The walk home from the law office was a blur. The sounds of Harbor City, the distant cry of gulls, the rumble of the streetcar were muted, as if I were hearing them from underwater. When I finally climbed the last flight of stairs and stepped back into my attic, the silence was absolute. But it was a loud silence, filled with echoes of my father's testimony. Everything that had once been a source of comfort was now an indictment. The towering stacks of research books were monuments to wasted time. The half-finished manuscript on my laptop screen was proof of my instability. I looked at my hands, at the faint blue ink stains around my cuticles, and for the first time, I saw them not as the marks of a creator, but as the grime of irresponsibility. I looked in the small, gilt-edged mirror by the door and saw the woman my father had described a dreamer lost in a fantasy, unfit for the real world. My world, once a sanctuary, had become a prison cell built from my own passions. A ping from my laptop announced a new email. It was from Adrian's lawyer. The subject line read, "A humane resolution." My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a settlement offer framed in sickeningly benevolent terms. Adrian was prepared to be generous. He would grant me supervised visitation with Leo every other weekend. And as a final act of charity, he would cover the rent on my attic apartment for 1 year, an offer made to ensure a smooth transition while she seeks a more stable and appropriate line of work. It wasn't a lifeline. It was an anchor designed to sink me to the bottom. The offer was a final crushing humiliation, a neatly packaged summary of everything they thought of me, that I was a charity case. A child to be managed. That was the bottom of the abyss. The moment I truly believed they had won, I was still staring at the screen, my vision blurred with unshed tears, when the door creaked open. Leo was home. My sister must have dropped him off. He stood in the doorway, his school backpack slung over one shoulder, his dark eyes taking in the scene with a child's unnerving intuition. He knew. He didn't ask any questions. He walked over to me, his small face serious, and pushed a piece of folded paper into my hand. I opened it. It was a drawing done in his favorite colored pencils. A fierce knight in silver armor, a sword held high, stood protectively in front of a small dark-haired boy. The knight was fighting a massive, terrifying dragon, but the knight wasn't a man. She had long brown hair just like mine, and her face was set in a look of grim determination. Underneath the drawing, in his careful 9-year-old handwriting, were 5 words: "My mom is a hero." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about my pride anymore. It wasn't about proving my father or my ex-husband wrong. It was about him. About being the hero my son already believed I was. They had torn down my world, but they would not touch his. I would not let them. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time before A.J. Finian when I wrote as myself, Taylor Vance. A time before I learned that for my family, my success would always be a problem to be managed. The first lesson came at a family barbecue shortly after my debut novel had received a surprisingly positive review in a national paper. I was feeling proud, a little bold. But my great aunt cornered me by the potato salad, her face a mask of concern. "It's lovely that you have a little hobby, dear," she'd said, patting my arm. "But a woman with too many sharp opinions and a name in the paper, you have to be careful. You'll scare the good men away." I had laughed it off, expecting my husband to come to my defense. Instead, Adrian had joined the conversation with a smooth smile. "Don't worry, Aunt Carol. I'm trying to convince her to take up more lucrative hobbies." He'd winked. They both laughed. It was a joke, but it was a joke that revealed a deep and unflattering truth. My ambition was an inconvenience to him. The final lesson, the one that broke me, came from my father. It was after that first royalty check arrived. A number so much larger than I had ever imagined it felt like a typo. It was validation. It was proof. I drove to my parents' house, my hands shaking with excitement, and presented the check to my father like an offering. I thought it would finally make him understand. He took it, his eyes scanning the numbers without a flicker of emotion. He handed it back to me. "It's a good one-time payment, Taylor," he said, his voice flat. My heart, which had been soaring, began to plummet. But what about next year? Or the year after? This isn't a career. It's a lottery ticket. Don't build your life on a lottery ticket. I need you to have a real profession, not a gamble. That was it. That was the moment I understood. They would never see it. They would never respect it. To them, my success would always be a fluke, an anomaly, a lottery ticket. They would want to control it, manage it, or dismiss it. My art, the very core of who I was, would never be safe with them. So I made a decision. I killed Taylor Vance, the author, and in the quiet of my attic, I created a ghost, a phantom, a name that could build worlds in safety protected by a wall of anonymity. I created A.J. Finian. My secrecy wasn't born of shame. It was an act of rebellion, a declaration of independence. It was a shield. And now, that shield was the only thing that could save me. Back in the present, the memory settled in my bones not as a source of pain, but as a core of steel. I looked at the insulting email from Adrian's lawyer still glowing on my screen. I saw my father's dismissive face, heard Adrian's condescending laugh. The fire Leo's drawing had sparked now roared into an inferno. With a click, I deleted the email. I would not surrender. I would not be managed. I would fight, but not on their terms. On mine. I went to my desk and opened a small, locked wooden box, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, heavy stock business card. It held only a name and a private phone number. Julian Croft, Viridian Books. Tucked underneath it was a small folded note, written in Julian's elegant scrawl. Only call when your world is collapsing. My world was in ashes. It was time to make the call. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed the international number. It rang 3 times. Then a crisp, British-accented voice answered. Mr. Croft's office. It was his executive assistant, a notoriously efficient woman, often referred to as the gatekeeper. My name is Taylor Vance. I began, my voice unsteady. I need to speak with him. It's an emergency. I'm afraid that's impossible. She said, her tone polite but firm as granite. Mr. Croft is in a board meeting in preparation for the London Book Fair. He is not to be disturbed for the rest of the week. My blood ran cold. Of course, it was too late. The path was blocked. It was a stupid, desperate idea. I see. I murmured, my throat closing up. Thank you. As she was about to disconnect, a final surge of adrenaline hit me. I had one card left to play. One password. Wait, I said, my voice suddenly calm and clear. Please tell him that A.J. Finian is calling. I took a breath. And tell him the Ember Stone is broken. The Ember Stone. The ancient artifact at the heart of my entire fictional universe, the symbol of a sacred broken oath. A code only he would understand. There was a silence on the other end of the line so profound, I could hear my own frantic pulse in my ears. It stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. I thought she had hung up. Then her voice came back, and every trace of cool professionalism had vanished. It was replaced by something else entirely. Awe and panic. Please hold, Miss Vance, she stammered. I'm connecting you immediately. The silence on the line stretched for a beat, and then a voice, a deep, resonant baritone I knew as well as my own, came through, laced with a familiar, weary urgency. Finian. What is it? What's happened? There was no preamble. I told him everything. The divorce, the custody battle, my father's testimony, The humiliation of the $500 contract. I spoke in a low, steady voice, the words pouring out of me not as a plea, but as a report from a battlefield. When I finished, Julian Croft was quiet for a moment. But it wasn't the silence of hesitation. It was the calm before a storm. They used the cover contract against you, he finally said, his voice dangerously soft. The one my legal team drafted to protect you. A quiet fury simmered beneath the words. This, then, is not merely a personal matter. This is an attack on an asset of this house. They want a war. Taylor. They will have one. He told me his flight would land in Harbor City in 24 hours. My lawyer was to file for a final arbitration session to present new and conclusive evidence. And then he said the words that became my mantra for the next 2 days. Just hold on. The cavalry is coming. And so I did. 2 days later, I walked back into that same soulless conference room, but I was a different woman. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, unnerving calm. I sat at the table, my hands folded, and met Adrian's confused gaze with a level stare. My serenity clearly unnerved him. He expected tears, desperation. He didn't know what to do with my peace. His lawyer, a man named Davies, began, his voice oozing with smug finality. He summarized their case, painting me once more as the unstable artist, the irresponsible dreamer. He gestured to the infamous $500 contract. The evidence is clear and uncontested, he concluded, turning to the arbitrator. It is time, sir, to place this child in a stable, successful home. Just as the arbitrator opened his mouth to speak, my lawyer stood. Sir, before you render your decision, we have one final witness who has flown here to provide definitive testimony regarding my client's professional standing and financial stability. Davies let out an incredulous laugh. A last-minute witness. This is the height of desperation. The door to the conference room opened. Julian Croft entered. He wasn't a large man, but his presence seemed to suck the air out of the room, shifting its entire center of gravity. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept across the room before landing on me with a brief, reassuring nod. The room fell silent. Adrian and my father exchanged a look of complete bewilderment. They had no idea who he was, but they knew instinctively that he was a man who did not belong in their tidy, predictable world. Davies was the first to recover, his voice laced with annoyance. And you, our Julian Croft, took the seat at the head of the table, placing a thin leather briefcase before him. My name is Julian Croft, he said, his voice calm and measured. I am the president and CEO of Viridian Books Worldwide. The name landed with a soft thud in the quiet room. I saw Davies' eyes widen slightly. Viridian wasn't just a publisher. It was a global empire. And what is your connection to Ms. Vance Davies? Pressed, unable to keep the suspicion from his voice. Julian didn't look at him. Instead, his piercing gaze found my father. Before I answer that, he began, his voice dropping, commanding the attention of everyone present. I'd like to refer to the testimony given by Mr. Henry Vance. You stated under oath that your daughter, she can barely hold a job. He spoke the words like a pronouncement, and I saw my father flinch as his own ugly detailership was thrown back at him by this powerful stranger. Julian then turned to the arbitrator. Sir, the woman whose own father believes her to be a failure is in fact the single most valuable asset my company possesses. She is the crown jewel of my publishing house. Davies jumped to his feet. An author. We are aware of her hobby. We have the contract. $500. A smile touched Julian Croft's lips, but it was a chilling, predatory thing. He leaned forward slightly, his posture radiating an authority that felt absolute. The symbolic weight of the Chief Justice stood up. That contract, he said, his voice dripping with disdain, was a decoy. A legal fiction my firm created to protect our author's privacy while she was doing initial research. You want to know about her real job? He paused, letting the anticipation build until it was a tangible pressure in the room. She's been, for the past 7 years, the sole creative mind behind the pseudonym A.J. Finian. A blank stare from Adrian, confusion from my father. They didn't know the name. But the arbitrator's eyes widened. Davies's jaw went slack. Julian continued, his voice rising with each new revelation, every word a hammer blow against their tower of lies. A.J. Finian, the author of The Etherean Chronicles, a series that has to date sold over 120 million copies worldwide. It has been translated into 52 languages. He turned his gaze on Adrian. The motion picture rights alone were sold last year for a sum that has more zeros than your company's entire valuation. The woman you called unstable, he said, his voice now, like ice, is one of the most powerful and influential storytellers of her generation. Then he opened his briefcase and produced a thick, professionally bound portfolio, sliding it down the polished table toward the arbitrator. This is a certified summary of Ms. Vance's financials for the past 3 years, prepared by my firm's accounting department. I believe it will answer any lingering questions about her ability to provide for her son. The arbitrator opened the portfolio. I watched his face cycle through astonishment to shock to something that looked like pure, unadulterated awe. He slowly closed the cover and looked up, not at Julian, but at me, with an expression of profound and entirely new respect. The arbitrator didn't need any more time. His voice when he finally spoke was sharp and decisive. Full physical and legal custody of the child, Leo Thorne, is hereby granted to his mother, Taylor Vance. He wasn't finished. He fixed Adrian and his lawyer with a glare. Furthermore, I am issuing a formal reprimand to you, Mr. Davies, for knowingly presenting misleading and incomplete evidence with the intent to misrepresent a party's character. It is unethical and frankly appalling. Adrian sat, frozen, his face a pale, bloodless mask. My father seemed to have aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. His shoulders slumped, his face crumpled in horror and disbelief. He was looking at me truly, looking at me as if for the very first time. As Julian and my lawyer gathered their papers, my father stumbled toward me, his hands trembling. "Taylor," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. I had no idea. I didn't know." I looked at the man who had raised me, the man whose approval I had craved for a lifetime. There was no anger left in me, just a vast, quiet emptiness. "It's not about what you didn't know, Dad," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's about what you never bothered to ask. You saw what you wanted to see, a daughter who disappointed you. You stood on that witness stand and you tried to take my son from me based on your own prejudice." I took a deep breath. That isn't something not knowing can excuse. I didn't wait for his reply. There was nothing more to say. I turned and walked out of that room, leaving him alone, with the ashes of a relationship he himself had set on fire. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a release. I was finally free from the weight of his judgment. 6 months later, the autumn sun was warm on our faces as Leo and I walked through Harbor City Park. The world was different now. The secret was out, and in its place, a strange, new, and wonderful honesty had taken root. So everyone knows now, Leo asked, kicking at a pile of red maple leaves, that you're the one who wrote the books about Etheria. They do, I said, smiling. Aren't you scared anymore? I stopped and knelt in front of him, taking his small hands in mine. No, I'm not scared, because I realized the best story I could ever write is ours, you and me, and I don't ever want to hide that. Later that week, I sat in a television studio, bright lights warm on my face, for my first public interview as myself. The host asked the final question. You guarded your identity for so long. Why reveal it now? I looked into the camera, but I wasn't thinking about the millions of people watching. I was thinking about the woman I used to be, hiding in her attic. I used to think that hiding my light was the only way to keep it safe. I said my voice, clear and strong. But I learned that all that does is let the darkness think it's won. Justice isn't always something that's given to you. Sometimes it's something you have to claim for yourself. The interview ended. As we left the studio, Leo and I passed a large bookstore. In the front window was a massive display for the newest book in the Etherean Chronicles. On the cover, for the first time beneath the familiar, magical pseudonym, was my own name, printed in bold, confident letters, Taylor Vance. Leo squeezed my hand, I squeezed back. And together, we walked out into the bright afternoon sun, ready to start our new chapter. And so, my story found its new beginning. But the lesson it taught me is one I will carry forever. Your worth is not a reflection you seek in someone else's eyes. It's a fire you are born with. And sometimes you have to become the fierce guardian of your own flame, especially when the very people who were supposed to cherish its warmth try to extinguish it. The greatest justice we can ever achieve is not just to prove our critics wrong, but to finally fully and unapologetically live our own truth. That's all I have for now. Thank you for sitting with me and letting me share my story with you. If you've ever felt like family was both your safest harbor and your deepest wound, if you've ever felt you had to shrink yourself or hide your light just to keep the peace, if you've ever been torn between walking away from those you love and losing yourself by holding on, or maybe you've never been through it yourself, but something in my story resonated within your heart, just comment, I see you below. Because being truly seen is often the first step toward healing. Feel free to share a piece of your own story here, or just listen to the stories of others. Sometimes that's the most powerful magic of all. I'll be here, we'll be here, and maybe, just maybe this little corner of the internet can be a place where stories like ours find a home. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, healing takes time, but you never have to write that chapter alone. Is that from Dad? It's from his lawyers, honey, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I sat on the floor, the envelope in my lap, and took a deep breath. I knew what it was, of course. Adrian wanted full custody. He'd made that clear. I steeled myself and tore it open. The words swam before my eyes, legal jargon designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Best interests of the child, primary physical custody, parental fitness evaluation. It was all expected. Then I got to the last page, the preliminary witness list. My eyes scanned the names. Business partners of Adrian's I barely knew. A former nanny he'd fired. And then a name that felt like a physical sting, Eliza Vance, my own sister. A bitter taste filled my mouth, but it was the last name on the list typed in bold that shattered the snow globe completely. Henry Vance, my father. The envelope slipped from my numb fingers. The golden afternoon light filtering through the window seemed to instantly turn gray and cold.